So everything we'll talk about today is really what we've learned from our best of breed customers. And so this is the obligatory NASCAR slide. But in terms of the Triblio platform, I want to give you just a quick overview so you understand as we're going through the use cases, what I'm talking about, the different channels that we manage, the different kind of avenues that our customers are using to communicate with their target audience. And so this, Triblio itself, we integrate with Marketo. We integrate with Salesforce. We integrate with Microsoft Dynamics, whatever CRM you guys are utilizing. And the idea in this orchestration, targeting, and analytics function of the platform is to integrate your various different data sets, your own data, your purchase data, your intent data through our strategic partnership with Bombora, in order to then pick the appropriate target audience that you will serve ads to drive engagement from those accounts, how you will create personalized web experiences for each of your target accounts, because that personalized experience helps to improve conversion rates from these organizations. And then on the other side of the fence, we solve a very specific challenge for sales reps or SDR teams, which we call sales activation. And the idea with sales activation is exactly how it sounds. How do we activate sales to reach out to an account, to understand which accounts that they need to target? So when we talk about sales activation, we talk a lot about prioritization and really pointing them in the right direction of the accounts that they need to be going after that align to who marketing is communicating with as well. And so that's the real high level overview of the platform. And now we're going to go into some considerations about ABM. And so when you start to think about your ABM program, we generally find that our customers will go through 6 very kind of repeatable steps in kind of forming where they are within their ABM journey. And so, obviously you can see, exactly what these different steps involve, but generally speaking, when we speak to organizations, and even though sales has been doing account-based selling forever, and marketing has been targeting very strategic accounts since marketing was, invented, the idea is that to scale it and to really do it efficiently, most people are still relatively new to that. And so when they come to us or they start to evaluate different solutions, we tend to find that they're actually still somewhere in the neighborhood of step 2 or step 3, where they're still trying to figure out, like, how do I target the best accounts? Why am I going to target these accounts? And is there a method for quantifying or prioritizing these accounts so I know that I'm not just kind of cherry picking the, Fortune 50, which we all know it can take forever for us to break into that account. We want to try to figure out, like, who is the most low-hanging fruit, so we know, okay, we're going to prioritize these accounts, we're going to get it off and running quickly, and then as we optimize, we're going to start to scale it out to the various different tiers of our list. And so step 2 or step 3, whether you're in the finding the best accounts step, or you're in the planning stages, there are certainly some things that we can do to help you. And the first thing would be to understand what ABM model you're planning on running. And then the last model that you might think about is, we call it focused demand, but it's essentially marketing taking more of an earnest on ABM. And then you tend to see that in those models, it's a significantly larger list. It could be in the hundreds or the thousands of companies. But the ideal focus is actually still demand generation. So it's improving quality of MQLs that are actually delivered to sales. But if you're thinking about, like, what are my objectives of that particular program, it would be trying to do more with less, focusing on lead quality, or even eliminating waste in terms of, like, your program. And so those are things to consider, as you're starting to think about ABM, or your clients might start to think about ABM. But most importantly, understanding what model you're running really will kind of determine what channels are going to be involved in that program, how they're going to do it, what departments are going to be involved, and so on and so forth. So it's really, really good to understand this as a basis for, where your program will actually start. But when we look at our customers and we look at our best in breed and the people who are really driving some high performing, metrics, we tend to find that there are three main, uh, kind of things or characteristics of those programs that we tend to find are really working with, kind of firing on all cylinders. And so the first one is targeting the best accounts. And so obviously that's going to be the foundation for any ABM program. You're only going to be as good as your target audience. And so we're going to go into that first. But in order to do that, I want to kind of take just a quick step back and just think about the buyer's process. And so for most organizations like Marketo or like Eloqua, like the platform itself is more geared toward a form submission, right? To then track that lead and then through the lead life cycle. And so there's a point of contact registration where people obviously fill out the form of yourselves, of your competitors, and then they start evaluation. But that window of time is very, very small. And so what we tend to find is that most buyers are actually delaying that form submission significantly longer than they did in the past. And that's probably no secret. Like that type of, that hidden funnel or that pre-funnel has certainly been a topic in MarTech for so long. We've actually done our own research on it. And when we looked at, I think it was 200,000 sales cycles over 15 customers, we found that 45% of those prospects engaged with the company prior to a form submission about 90 days prior. So they were on the website kind of doing their research and trying to form an opinion and think about, are they a good solution for me 90 days before they ever filled out the form. So there's a huge gap in that time. And so your pipeline or, kind of who actually is this very condensed part of this overall bigger picture. And our customers who are really doing ABM and doing it in a way that is really looking to find these companies that are in the hidden funnel so that they can engage and nurture more earlier and much longer in that buyer journey, right? So how do we find those companies is through a combination of first-party intent data. So our platform does reverse IP lookup, and most ABM platforms will, but the idea is to understand, are there companies that are exhibiting first-party data behavior, like page views, like content views if they're not gated content? Are they coming to very specific product pages, so on and so forth? That first-party intent data becomes really, really important because if they have not filled out a form, a platform like Marketo, it's very challenging for you to track them and track them easily and then market to them, right? And so our platform allows you to do that, and most ABM platforms do. And then even going further back than that first party data in terms of behavior, we actually look at third party intent. So again, our strategic partnership was with Bombora, but there's plenty of other intent providers out there. And the idea is to look at the behavior of these accounts on other websites, and are you seeing an uptick or a trend in their behavior around a particular topic or keyword that is important to your business? Because at that point, we can then understand, okay, should we prioritize them? Should they be somebody that we're marketing to or start serving ads to get them to engage with us? And so that's how our customers are really kind of taking the information and then figuring out, who do I prioritize? Who do I start to go after? Because if you have a list of 1,000 accounts, like if you're just throwing a dart at a newspaper, you're not being very efficient with it. So we want to make sure that we can quantify behavior so that we can make sure that we understand like who goes to the top of the list and who comes back into the list later on. And so for someone like a Redpoint Global, one of our CDP customers, so they sell a customer data platform. They tend to find that if they're looking at accounts on Bombora, for example, that are trending or showing a lot of digital behavior around customer data platform, we know that they are an IT-focused buyer. Now, if they're seeing that an account is actually showing a lot of behavior around customer experience platform, they know it's more of like a creative buyer or more of a marketing buyer. But what they can decipher from that data is like, who do I target within this account? And so they do contact level targeting or cookie level targeting, meaning that they take they can take the Marketo cookies or the Marketo contacts and they can put them in a Triblio, and we'll actually serve ads to those very specific individuals. So when they're looking at serving a message to get them to try to engage, we can actually serve different ads at different times to different personas, and therefore serving up messaging that resonates with that persona much better. Now, depending on how they interact with the ad, we can actually serve very specific website experiences for each of those individuals or each of those accounts. So again, serving a CDP message for that more technical focused account, or CX or CEP message for those more kind of customer experience types of accounts. And then on the other side of the fence, we serve all of that data to sales, so that when sales starts their outbound cadence to these accounts, they know, okay, I need to use a CDP message because we're serving those types of ads to this account. And then, that's just kind of a campaign overview, but we tend to see a lot of lift coming from that, being, obviously being very targeted with the types of messaging that you're serving to these either cookied people in Marketo or, these personas that they're targeting within these accounts. One pro tip that I'll share that most people don't consider when they're evaluating a programmatic ad vendor is how that ad vendor approaches serving ads. And so these are the 5 ways that we can actually serve ads against. So we can do it at the IP level, but most of our customers are actually looking at persona level cookies. So evaluating are there VPs of marketing or VPs of sales in this organization that I want to target. When we don't actually have their email address to use, we can actually target them based on their title. Or they do contact level cookie targeting, which again, that's using their email address to actually find that cookie and then serve them a specific message via the ad networks. So don't ever be limited in that targeting capability because, depending on the type of campaign and the eventual goal of that campaign, you may need, 1 or 2 or even 3 of these various different types of strategies. And so always consider that when you're thinking about going with a programmatic ad vendor. Now, that's kind of going through those target accounts. The second success factor that we tend to see is actually orchestrating both sales and marketing. So that really ensures, and like I said, I came from the marketing automation world where the idea there is it's like, hey, we're aligning marketing and sales. And beforehand, I would always think like, oh, you have to have a marketing automation platform to do that. When in reality, like you actually would use a mix of various technologies and for specific goals like an outbound cadence, like you need something that's actually giving you anonymous data to be able to have your SDRs actually work against, data that's not a known lead, right? And so when we talk about orchestration, we think about delivering a consistent buying experience across both sales and marketing. That means everyone's got to be on the same page. And so we have an integration with Salesforce or Dynamics that allows sales reps to see all of the data that marketing sees. Ad impressions served, personalizations presented on a website experience, where they sent it to a cadence through SalesLoft. All of that gets kind of compiled into the similar reporting that both sales and marketing can work off of, so that everyone knows like, hey, we're all aligned because we're seeing the same data and we're working off of that same, sheet music, for lack of better terms. And so someone like Financial Force, who utilizes Marketo in their cadences to their tier 1 accounts, this is how they would build kind of an orchestrated campaign around ads, direct mail, SDR outreach, personalization, emails that come out of Marketo. It's really set up over time to kind of go through these various different stages where these target accounts see very specific message through a specific channel. And so they might warm up the account using ads. They might then kind of score the account and automatically launch a direct mailer going out the door. In stage 3, they might use some automation like SalesLoft or Marketo to start doing some SDR outreach or even email air cover support for these SDR teams. where they're actually pushing people back to the various digital properties so that they see these personalized web experiences. Now, for organizations that don't have a tier one account list, but still want to do ABM and have more of kind of a looser classification of where their accounts may fall in like a priority list, we can actually use intent data to drive their campaigns. So someone like a Veristore, they integrate and they've figured out kind of what their 13 different use cases are. And then they align those use cases to Bombora topics. And then as they start to see these companies, trending upwards or increasing their behavior around these particular topics, those companies actually then start to automatically see ads, about that particular use case. And then they also see personalizations as well. So when they start to interact with the website, they start to see, various different solution or product-oriented personalizations that are actually all tied back to this intent data that they're finding through Bombora. And then they score and then they activate sales through SalesLoft. And the idea there is, can we book more meetings? By doing some of this air cover support, but also trying to get higher in the buyer journey, they were able to double their meetings booked by phone. And these are with accounts that are very early on in their process, and they have not submitted a form, right? They're completely, kind of anonymous accounts that they never would have found had they not looked at that intent data. And so Veristore, what their kind of use case or what activating your sales team or your SDR team might look like with a platform or utilizing these various types of intent data might be prioritizing these weekly accounts for your SDRs so that they know, like, this week I'm focused on these 10 accounts, right? And then you can automatically sort them, or you should sort them into playbooks, meaning that, are they using a competitor solution? They run this cadence. Are they looking at a particular use case? They run this cadence, and so on and so forth through your various different plays. And you can automatically, obviously, enrich those contacts. You can do that via Salesforce integration with like a Zoom Info or, a Discover org. So enriching their contacts. And you definitely want to consider creating one-to-one types of assets that they might use within their cadences. So we have a solution for that, but you can do that manually, right? You can create industry-focused landing pages through Marketo, and then use those as a part of your plays. And so when they know that they're serving, they're sending them down a cadence that is talking to manufacturing, they know that we use this link to a specific landing page because that's going to be more personalized, and that personalization is going to end up driving more results or more conversions or more, phone calls, more responses, whatever the goal of that cadence ends up being. And so a lot of what I'm talking about today might seem to be focused more around Triblio, but we tend to find that actually people who are adopting ABM, they're doing this manually. So they're again creating their own landing pages. They're figuring out different sources of intent data so that they can kind of prioritize their list. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be a platform involved there, but when you are looking to scale, there's obviously some solutions out there for you. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is adopting ABM metrics. And so we tend to find that people need to kind of just better understand, like, what are the different things that, traditional lead or traditional demand gen looks at, and then what ABM, looks at and how you might transition that. And so, obviously we're looking at accounts versus leads. And when we score accounts, we are actually sending over the fence to sales marketing qualified accounts. So these are accounts that have not submitted a form, but they're showing enough digital behavior, again, anonymous visitor traffic, third-party intent, that sort of thing, that they're showing enough of this behavior that it warrants an SDR outreach or warrants more action to come from it. So we send it over the fence as a scored MQA. We tend to look at more cross-channel and pipeline influence. So what are the various different channels touching this account? And we have various reports that look at that. But again, it doesn't necessarily need to be through an ABM platform to be able to see that information. ABM is more outbound focused than demand gen, which is typically more inbound focused. And then, What we also tend to find is that ABM, they tend to look more at the revenue generated versus the number of MQLs or SQLs that marketing generates. So when you're getting started with kind of transitioning the mind frame to ABM, and we tend to see a lot of people when they come to us, they're in, a traditional demand gen model, and then they slowly transition over time to an ABM model. So I talked about Financial Force previously. When they first started with Triblio, they were about 80% demand gen and tracking 20% ABM metrics. By the end of the first 12 months, they had flipped that. So they were doing more ABM focus metrics versus demand gen focus. I will say that demand gen never goes out the door, right? You're always going to track leads. You're always going to track those certain things that you're looking at with traditional lead generation. You just might, depending on the company, might see a different balance of the type of importance or significance of those metrics. But what we always say is start with a simple ABM funnel. We tend to look at, unengaged to engaged, unengaged to reached accounts, and then reach to engaged, and engage to MQA, and then MQA to pipeline. And so these are the various definitions of kind of those various different stages. But at the end of the day, you're looking for kind of how much pipeline value are your ABM campaigns influencing, and being able to kind of track that more easily. And so I believe that's the last slide. So basically what we talked about today is, we're discussing best practices for high performing ABM. I'm going to put together a smart page, which is a Triblio customized landing page for each one of you. So, hopefully I can, kind of exchange email addresses and kind of connect with you guys on LinkedIn so I can get you that data. But it'll essentially be a customized landing page for you that you can start to learn a little bit more about us. You can learn a little bit more about our customers and what they're doing. But that customized landing page, again, will be for your business only. So it'll be very customized to each one of you. And then, again, next steps, if you guys are interested or you have clients that might be interested in analyzing their ABM, we have a couple of different call to actions that you guys can engage with us on, which is one, the free analysis, that ABM success kit. Or if you want to schedule time with our chief customer officer, he's always open to talking with marketers, just having a casual conversation about your ABM program and how that's going. And so that is the end of, if you guys want an explanation of what the ABM success kit entails, here are some of the questions that we might answer for you using your data and presenting that for you. But I won't kind of focus too much on those CTAs. But I do want to open up the floor. Are there any questions about anything that I talked about today, or anything you want to dig into a little bit more? Happy to elaborate.
But yeah, I have a quick question. So you
Absolutely.
went back to the point about regards to multiple areas about different focuses of, I can't remember what slide number it was, but you talked about IP addresses and assuming different areas along the kind of collecting that data, right, from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So how do you guys handle that in today's world, right? In regards to especially IP addresses and stuff like that, because obviously we're all remote these days, right? So,
Sure.
I think right there, IP address, all these the cookies make sense, so the targeting those things kind of, it's kind of the structure along those lines. But then if you're looking at kind of the IP address, do you guys manage it along those lines? Because I think that's a big struggle for a lot of companies today, right? So just trying to figure out, it's like, okay, yeah, we're all. I think some of them, I think, kind of go through Atlanta, right? And I'd be out here looking at it out in the West, right? So that doesn't do a lot of good. So how do you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And so I would say for the most part, in today's kind of COVID world where everybody's working from home, we tend to find that a lot of our customers are pivoting away from doing any type of IP address targeting. That was a very small percentage of our customers, only because if you're thinking about ad spend, right, it's a very easy way to blow through a marketing budget, right? Because if you're serving a bunch of wasted impressions, it's probably not going to, your ad budget's just not going to last very long. And so for the most part, our customers are typically doing persona cookie or contact cookie targeting because it just becomes just a more precise method for delivering the ads. And therefore, like, we're not serving ads to people who probably or may not be your target audience. And I always use the example of ourselves, like, we obviously target marketing focused individuals, we target salespeople. We don't really want legal teams or finance teams to see our ads, right? So I would never, or our internal team would never target at the IP level, only because like you're just wasting money at that point.
Right.
There might
Yeah.
be an instance where finance needs to see that, but you could just target them with very specific messaging through, cookie targeting, for example, versus like hoping that they see the ad because they're in a specific building or they're in a specific geographic location.
I have a question, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely.
Given that certain browsers are starting to enhance privacy controls, what do you see the impacts of those kind of locking down cookie data is going to have on your end of ABM?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I'm sure everybody's kind of seen the release from Google saying like, oh, we're basically going to halt the use of third-party cookies in 2022. And while that's a very long way off, a lot of where our focus is actually focused in on like LinkedIn in particular. But to give you guys just a little bit of an organizational background on Triblio, last month we were actually entered into a merger acquisition with a company called IDG. I'm not sure if you guys know who they are, but they own the largest media property or IT focused media properties in the world. So like PC World, CIO.com, Mac World, Computer World, all of these kind of like, they're actually the biggest contributors to the Bombora database, which is kind of interesting. But what we're currently doing is we're actually integrating that first party data to our platform. And so even from a GDPR perspective, our targeting capability is going to be significantly better once that data is integrated, because it's going to be considered first party data according to GDPR because we own the properties and they're subscription based focused. So as people, and it was a great move for IDG as well as for Triblio, of course, but in the sense of like, how does it affect us from a cookie targeting perspective? For any ABM vendor, once those regulations come into play, or once kind of the browsers crack down on those third-party cookies, a lot of organizations are going to be very limited in the way that they can target. And so that means like, persona cookie data may not be as available, contact cookie data may not be as available. And as Trent mentioned in his question, like IP is where everybody reverts back to if those cookies aren't available. It's going to be very hard if we're, coming up on 2022 and we're still kind of dealing with this whole COVID situation, right? And so for us, we're very excited about the future because of that, because like we're going to have a great kind of database of first party intent or first party cookie data to work off of. So we don't see that, at least now, as of a month ago, affecting us as much, which is great. But it could certainly be a significant problem for some other ABM vendors out there, or any ad vendor in general, right? So even traditional DSPs and that sort. So great question, though.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
I'd like to just touch back on that third piece of the slide before the one you were looking at just now that
Okay.
talked about you had large accounts, you had named accounts, and then
Oh,
the third
yeah.
one I think was demand-based account. Could you just kind of review that again and kind of what
Yeah,
that is?
definitely. So these are just the various different models that most of the bigger analysts are classifying like these different models, right? So I believe this particular terminology is pulled from, I guess they're Forrester now, but Cirrus Decisions. So large account ABM, typically at a very high level, like the characteristics of large account is that it's a much smaller and more strategic account list. So when you're evaluating like, am I in a large account ABM situation? When you look at your account list, it's generally focused around maybe 1 to 3 accounts per sales rep. And so if you have 10 sales reps, that's only 30 accounts, right? Very, very, very small. But these are really large enterprise accounts. And most of your efforts will be around how do I help sales to, get these larger accounts to these kind of virtual roundtables, or how do I get these very large target accounts to take a meeting with my sales team. Named account ABM is characterized more from a list perspective, significantly larger. So you might have a BDR team of, say 20, and each of them may have 20 to 50 accounts. That's in the hundreds range, right? And so most of the characteristics of a named account model is that they're primarily focused more on outbound. So how do I break into these target accounts that are named? So, we own, like each of these SDRs own these accounts, but there may not be somebody who's filled out a Marketo form. There may not be somebody who's attended a webinar before, but they may just be showing digital behavior around, on our website or, through third-party intent providers. And so now your SDR team is trying to figure out who those personas are that they target, and they're then kind of going outbound to try to get into this account. So primarily outbound focused. And then focus demand, which is the last one, is primarily taking ABM tactics, but applying them to a demand gen model. So you're supporting inbound, you're trying to focus on driving better lead quality, try to be more efficient, maybe with your ad spend or with, being more efficient in converting people to the funnel. But it's primarily a much larger target account list. So, in the thousands, where you're generating campaigns that are really focused at, supporting inbound lead generation.
So in order to be able to accomplish this, a lot of that ownership data of which leads are assigned to which sales SDRs, sales reps, that is highly dependent on CRM connectivity between your platform and directly in the CRM, or does that have to go through Marketo or something afterwards? How does that look like?
Yeah, great question. For the most part, we're looking at CRM data. So, again, integrations with Dynamics, integration with Salesforce, and running that off of the account object. So whoever that account owner ends up being. That being said, you could focus some of these efforts or your different channels around Marketo. So like you could create an ad program that will target accounts that have signed up and are a part of a particular smart list or particular segment. You could do that, and that could also be named account, right? It could be large account, depending on where that's coming from. But for the most part, it's generally focused around CRM and the data that's in CRM.
Can you talk a little bit about the point of differentiation between Marketo's ABM module and Triblio? And I know it's kind of a loaded question a little bit, but
No, it's okay.
It'd be good to kind of get a comparison of why you'd use one versus the other.
Absolutely. So I'll admit, I admitted to Katie and beforehand, I'm not a Marketo expert, right? So I believe that their ABM tool consists of like AdBridge. They're I think it was Insightera, but RTP or real-time personalization. I believe that. So in comparison to them, when we're talking about ads or anything programmatically, we're generally talking about it through the ad network and not through various different social channels. So we can do promoted and sponsored content via LinkedIn, but we tend to not focus on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter as a part of like our programmatic ads. From an RTP perspective, it's generally when people are evaluating like personalization, and I'll say about 65% of our customer base are Marketo users. And for the most part, I'd say about 90% of them, of those 65%, are using our personalization module versus RTP. And when you're looking at the actual like implementation and the actual like getting into the tacticals of building those personalizations, when people evaluate them side by side, they generally see ours as being significantly easier just because ours is more point and play. That's typically where we differentiate. And I, again, kind of going back to the programmatic piece, I don't know how AdBridge operates. Do they only serve ads to like the lead that has filled out the form, or can they do that at the IP level or at the account level? I'm not really sure. But if it cannot, for those who are familiar with AdBridge and how it works, if they cannot and they're only serving ads to the leads, that's also a point of differentiation between our platforms, is that we tend to focus on like, oh, yes, they might be a lead in Marketo, but we also want to kind of nurture the stakeholder group, and those people may not have raised their hand, so we're going out there and trying to find them with cookie-based targeting.
I love this topic. I'm so glad that this is the first one. I was reading a white paper from Pantheon the other day, doing a survey of small agencies, of like 1,200 small agencies, and the number one topic that their clients across those 1,200 agencies have asked about is ABM. So it's really growing a lot. Do you think that ABM will be kind of ubiquitous as things go on, and kind of what you've seen, or do you think it's only for certain types of companies, and that there are types that maybe, maybe should either grow or pivot a little bit before they're qualified to be able to use ABM in their instances?
That's a great question. I would say like, don't focus so much on the technology, but focus on like the cultural and the actual process changes that ABM brings to an organization, right? Because I talked about Financial Force and how they, even from a tracking their metrics perspective, they do kind of a percentage mix of like what they find in terms of significance from their demand gen programs and their ABM programs. But that cultural change took a long time, right? It's getting sales to know that they're not focusing just on these leads that are coming in the door, but they're focused on, accounts that are showing behavior, right? It's about like not just sending emails or just sending ads to people that we know are in Marketo, but we have to kind of really dig into our personas and figure out like who are we targeting, so we can start to nurture all of them with ads and then bring them back to the website for conversion. So I would say it's less of like thinking about whether their Marketo or their Salesforce instance or their Dynamics instance is set up in a way to support ABM, but whether or not like culturally they're ready to take on like a completely different model of how they're driving demand to the funnel. And so that would definitely be like, and I'll admit, like we talk to a lot of people that are just like, they're just not ready, right? And they want to do ABM, and like if they do sign on with us, they're typically running like focused demand, right? But I think what people need to start thinking about is like, do we have a target account list? Like, is sales on board with like, working with us? Because like, I'll admit, I'm a sales guy, right? So we talk to a lot of sales teams that are there that are just not ready to like get on board with what marketing is doing. And that's also a cultural challenge that they need to think about as well. And so the short answer to it is like, are they culturally ready versus is their tech stack ready?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions.
Eddie,
Hmm.
I heard a lot of talk about different platforms while we were going through the presentation.
Absolutely.
Do you have an idea of like what's an ideal tech stack look like in order to properly get your ABM up and running? I heard SalesLoft, which is a sales outreach tool. I
Yep.
heard you talk about Discover Org, Zoom Info. What does your tech stack need to look like to be really successful with ABM right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. It certainly begs the question, or it certainly goes back to my answer, around like, are they culturally ready? But in terms of tech stack, like we do have customers that like don't integrate with their platforms, right? So like, for example, like Donaldson is a good example. Like they have Marketo or Pardot, one or the other. They have a marketing automation platform. They have Dynamics, but they're not integrated to either. They do a lot of the processes manually to like push the data back and forth. Only because it was like it's such a struggle for their IT team to like approve them to do that. In any event, like most of our customers, like the typical tech stack profile is they own a marketing automation platform, they have a CRM, and that could be Salesforce, it could be Dynamics, it could be the free version of HubSpot CRM. Doesn't necessarily matter, or Acoustic, which is Silverpop or IBM's platform. Those are generally like the two things that most people have. Because the other things like Sales Loft, obviously that type of like cadence work can be achieved just by having Gmail, right? We have relationships with like ZoomInfo or Kickfire or those data sourcing tools. So like if we need to pull some data from there, we can certainly kind of work with one of our partners. So traditionally, we're looking at people who have a Marketo instance, and then people who have Salesforce or Dynamics.
So when Triblio that gives intent data, do they give are they giving specific names, or is it just accounts? And then, because I'm thinking like, okay, if my sales team was to be given an account, that means they would have to use like a Discover org or a different sort of sourcing tool to go out and find names in this account to prospect. Is the Triblio ABM tool actually providing names to the sales team that like are in that pre-funnel you discussed?
Good question. So Bombora itself, the way that their platform operates is that all of the intent data is at the account level. For the most part, SDR teams and sales teams, they already have a process for how they figure out like who are they targeting within an account. So generally speaking, they just need to be pointed in the right direction. Because I started as an SDR a long, long time ago, and they as an SDR, they teach you like very different ways of like figuring out like the email nomenclature and then just filling in the gaps, right, with the name and first name or first initial dot last name, what have you. So we do that still like as a part of our process internally. Like our marketing team mandates that if we have an opportunity that goes past the first stage, the opportunity roles in the opportunity need to be filled out. And oftentimes we may not have that information. So I'm going to LinkedIn, I'm trying to figure out like who could be eventually part of this buying, decision. And then I figure out what their email address is and I plop them into Salesforce or, put them into, my database, whatever. And so they typically have their own process for already sourcing emails. So really when they get the intent, or when we're kind of pointing them in the direction using the various different types of intent, it's all about just like ushering them in the right direction. So they're not spending time like days upon days trying to figure out like, oh, who am I going to go after? Or just randomly calling down on a list, because I'd say either of those types of situations is more inefficient than it is efficient. And so we want to try to make them more efficient in what they do. So hopefully that answers your question.
It did. Want to make sure that the SDR team will still have to work, so that's good to hear
that. They will.
Awesome.
Thank you.